This is Rocky Snyder. At the tone, leave your name and message and I'll get back to you.
Hi, Rocky. It's Malcolm from The Art of Running here in Montreal. Hope you're doing okay over there in Santa Cruz. Okay, Rocky. Talk to you soon. Bye for now, mate.
This week's guest is my friend and colleague Malcolm Balk. He is the author of Master the Art of Running. He's a well-known Level 4 college running coach and still competes in his veteran category. In fact, the Canadian half marathon champion in 2011 and 2012 is held by him. And about 20 years ago, he brought running and the Alexander technique together when he developed the Art of Running workshops. So help me welcome my good friend Malcolm Balk. Well, welcome back to the RockFit Files. In this month of May, we have been really dedicated to informing you all about running because May is the month for running. And as, of course, we're sheltered in place, that is the one awesome activity. You don't need anything but a pair of feet to walk out your door and start running. So in this final series here, final episode for the series, I've invited a good friend of mine, Malcolm Balk, to come on the show with me. Malcolm is the author of The Art of Running, and he has been, for quite a while, a practitioner or a professional within the Alexander technique. And he has been using that not only in his musical approaches of being a concert cello player, but also being an avid runner and a remarkable competitive runner in his own right. So, Malcolm, welcome to the RockFit Files.
It's great to be here.
So, tell me, first of all, I want to get people to understand. Some might have heard of the Alexander technique, but it applies to all facets of life, which is fascinating. It's not just a running approach or a body alignment approach for certain things. It can apply to all aspects of life. So can you give us your nutshell version of what the Alexander technique is?
Yeah, that's a question we always like to get, you know. And my definition or description of the technique has varied over the years. What I would say about it today is that it's a technique that helps us learn to be more aware of how we do whatever we're interested in doing and learning to do it with less unnecessary effort and more ease and facility. And as you said quite accurately, this could apply to playing a musical instrument, peeling a carrot, mopping your floor, or running, going out for a run and trying to get rid of a little bit of the stress around this whole confinement thing with COVID. So it's a very general technique that was developed by an Australian actor over 100 years ago. And it's been accepted widely in the performing arts and acting and in music and in dance, where people's perceptions and awareness is pretty highly tuned. They need to really know what's going on and to be able to control things on a very sort of subtle basis. So the Alexander technique has proved very useful in those areas. And more recently, people have been using it to help with things like back pain. There was a major study that came out a few years ago that showed the Alexander technique is very useful in helping people deal with chronic back pain. It's been used more recently with Parkinson's, issues around Parkinson's. And for everybody who's spending a little bit too much time on Zoom or in front of the computer and is noticing that maybe the neck and shoulder tension, these are becoming problems. I mean, you've been addressing that yourself, Rocky. I noticed in a couple of your, episodes, you're dealing with some of the issues that are coming up with this overuse of the computer, perhaps. Well, we've been helping people with that for decades now.
So when you started, did you explore the Alexander technique because being a performer, a cellist, or was it because you were exploring it for your benefits for running?
That's a good question. I first went into it because I was interested in it as a cellist. I was kind of tight. I was a ice hockey player as a kid, and I think I brought that same kind of trying to check somebody into the boards attitude to the cello, and the two don't mix very well. So I was trying to kind of get out of that history that was in my body, which was a kind of an overreaction, too much effort and tension in the shoulders. And that would interfere with being able to play the cello the way I could hear it in my head, but I couldn't get it out, through this prison that I'd created in my body.
Sounds like the story of the Beauty and the Beast.
Right.
So
yeah.
how did you get them to love one another? I mean, hockey and cello, yeah, that goes together like peanut butter and broken glass. I don't know.
It's a natural transition, Rocky. You go from the hockey into the cello. I mean, I don't know. My mom made me play for a year or so when I was quite young, and I gave it up because, the kids were calling me Mr. Cello and all that. And I kind of gave it up just to play hockey. But when I got tired of getting beat up as a hockey player, I realized that there was a real love for music and a love for that instrument in me. And I went back to it, and it's been a major influence on my life. It brought me into the Alexander technique. And, I can't say that I play like Yo-Yo Ma, but I play with much more facility and much more pleasure now than I think I ever would from just using the old when in doubt, try harder approach, which is what we used in sports, and which I'll talk about when it comes to running,
Yeah, so I'm really curious to know what the sensation was like. Like, I was hoping that you were going to say that you started the Alexander technique for playing the cello rather than running, because now that you've seen the benefits of proper awareness, alignment, where are the restrictions, can I let go of those by certain movements or positions, then you probably were running prior to that and just going out for conditioning, whether it's for sports like hockey or whatnot. And then at that moment that you kind of had this epiphany, wow, maybe I can take this approach onto my running. What was that like your first few runs when you started to apply that technique?
Well, let me tell you, I'm a really slow learner. So the way it worked was I decided that I really liked the Alexander technique, and I was going to train to teach it. So I moved to England. And the way that it usually works is that when you're training as an Alexander teacher, they don't want you to bring strong habits, particularly physical habits if you're a weightlifter or a hockey player or even a runner, into the training program, because they're trying to undo old habits and free you up so that you have better use, better control of yourself. And so I asked the guy who was training me if he minded if I still ran while I was doing the training. And he said, as long as you don't tighten yourself up, I've got no problem with it. And the epiphany, what that did for me at that moment is that I became a conscious runner. I could no longer go out and just hammer. And the only metrics that counted were how fast or how far or who I beat. It was, how was I moving? Was I tightening up my shoulders while I ran? Was my head moving all over the place? Was I holding my breath? What sounds crazy in running, but people do that. What was I doing to get from A to B? Obviously, my legs were moving in some sort of way, and my arms probably a little bit as well. But I really had no idea of was I using too much effort? Was I using the wrong kind of effort? Was it misdirected? No idea about that. The only thing I understood in running, which I see a lot of when I watch other runners, and was, when in doubt, get a bigger hammer. Right? It's the approach that you're rewarded for in sport. I wasn't the most talented hockey player, but when push came to shove, I'd go out and I'd hit somebody. And I knew the coach liked that. Or I would skate. I would force myself, even with bad technique, I would just use pure willpower to skate faster than the guy beside me, even though I was using way too much effort for what I got out of it. That's what I understood. More effort.
It reminds me of what my dad used to say. I can remember him vividly saying, yeah, if it doesn't fit, force it.
Right. So that was the approach that I used. And then when my teacher said you can't tighten yourself up all of a sudden, well, in the Alexander technique, we do something called giving directions, which are mental thoughts. It could be, we have a specific set of them that we use, but it could be things like release your shoulders sideways, or free your neck so that your head balances more easily on the top of your spine. We have these directions that we repeat to ourselves. And eventually what starts to happen is those directions start to have meaning to them, and they actually start to, they create changes in your body. And I would be running and I would be giving myself those directions as I was running, as a way of trying to prevent the tension that I realized now that I was carrying with me when I ran. A lot of neck tension, head imbalance, shoulders working, too hard, interfering with my breathing. And what started to happen, and I didn't realize this for some years later, but I looked at my training diaries, and I basically, once I started doing that, even though I was competing at 800 meters and doing track workouts and all sorts of things, I didn't have a serious injury for the next 10 years. So from about age 29 to 39, basically no major injuries, the odd niggle here and there, but, in spite of training, pretty seriously on the track twice a week, running 800s, running 1500s, high intensity stuff, no injuries. And that's when I started saying, well, what am I doing different? When I looked at these things by the end of, 1988, 89, I started saying, well, this has been a really good period. What am I doing different? It wasn't my running technique. I wasn't doing yoga or some sort of stretching thing. And then the penny dropped, and I said, oh, the only thing is that I've developed what I might call a kinesthetic IQ. I've raised my kinesthetic IQ. So I would notice things happening early, and be able to either back off or do some sort of a release, or maybe just a stretch or something. And I would get things before they became problems.
Wow.
And I never had that perception before. It was always, respond after the horse had been stolen. It's like, instead of locking the gate early, I'd have to wait till the damn horse, was disappeared before I responded. And that changed. That changed for me.
So there's a lot of imagery, really, is what you're saying. Like within the coaching aspect, when you're working with a client, whether it be a runner or, for that matter, maybe a member of the orchestra, but you're working with the Alexander technique, you're really trying to get them to, one, bring a heightened level of awareness to what it is they're doing.
Yeah.
And also to just start to encourage different positions, and not in a forceful way or even a manual way, but just more from, can they follow the cues? So we're really talking about, can they start to train from the conscious down into the subconscious? And just like any other skills, such as like writing your name or driving a car, if you continually repeat it, then it gets embedded into the subconscious. Am I on the right track with that?
Yeah, I think that's pretty good, Rocky. Yeah, that's pretty good. And of course, because we're always changing, I mean, this COVID thing is a great example. I mean, who 3 months ago would have predicted what we've been living for the last 2 months, right? So because your body is always changing, you're always reacting. You've had a fight with your partner, you had a really good day, you've been doing some manual labor. Things are always changing. You always need to be renewing these thoughts, and these thoughts need to be, these directions that we give ourselves are constantly reorganizing ourselves to a higher state. Okay, it's not like learning to ride a bicycle where you get it once and you barely need to think about it again. The example I would use is surfing would be a great example. Okay, so you learn how to stand up on the board. Okay, right, that's it. Every time you go out, you just stand up and it's going to work just fine. Is that how it works?
Not a bit.
No, right. So your body is the same way. Your thinking is the same way. It changes all the time. So this is like a skill that you develop. With surfing, it might be a sense of balance and coordination. And this is a mind-body connection skill that you develop, and it's useful when it's applied. And yes, it does work unconsciously to a certain amount, but it's also, it requires some sort of level of consciousness to kind of refresh it, if I can, otherwise what happens is you just slip back into old patterns and old ways of doing things. You don't suddenly become a god because you've done the Alexander technique. You're given a technique that can help you be, fully realize what your human potential, but you got to put it into practice.
It's great because every guest I've had on for the last few weeks here discussing running, whether it be Helen Hall or Jeff Moreno or Coach GP last week and yourself, if we boil it down to the basic essence, it all comes down to awareness. Whether you're being aware in the Alexander technique, that type of approach, or what Helen was talking about, or even through technical equipment such as your Garmin or Polar Heart Rate, just bringing some awareness to how your body is actually functioning, moving, performing. That's the key right there.
I mean, a lot of the Alexander technique is retraining your body to be able to be in a state of more expansion. What you see all the time with people is a state of compression. Okay. And, and having done AIM, I might language this differently, but I'll talk about it within Alexander. What you see is, if you talk about, you think about the cogs, there's the cog where you're in anterior tilt in your pelvis and your head is in flexion, right? And then you go into extension with your head and kind of a slump in your body and your pelvis is in posterior tilt. Well, that's the default for most people, is that slump. Now, I agree now that you should be able to go there, but if I want to stay in one position or the other, I want to stay more towards the other one rather than the slump, because
Sure.
The slump causes a lot of problems. It causes compression. It makes it difficult for you to breathe. It makes you heavier. There's all kinds of things that happen with that end of the spectrum, as opposed to the one where your spine is in extension, your head is going in a sort of what we would call forward and up direction. That's a much healthier place to be if you want to be, you want to err towards one end of the spectrum or not. So and when we see great runners, we see that extension in the spine. We don't see generally a collapse. We do not see a posterior tilt held in the pelvis. They might go through that, but it's so fast that what's happening more of the time is a bit more of an anterior tilt in the pelvis. And you see that in runners. That's their default, if you like. Mm-hmm. So when you're able to create that sense of lengthening and expansion in your body, you move better, you breathe better, and you prevent problems.
And within your book, The Art of Running, do you bring up these kind of components to running? What are the major, like if there were 2 or 3 takeaways, if somebody picked up your book and read it, what were the things you're trying to get across the most?
Well, I don't talk about running technique much in my book. You want to read about running technique, read Helen Hall's book. She's really got some really great stuff in there. I stay very general because I think that I might change that a little bit now, but I generally what I've noticed for example, at one point I trained with Romanoff in the pose method, and he's got a very specific way of teaching running. Your foot does this, your hamstring does this, and you're meant to try to fit into that mold. I don't work that way with people. I take how they run and I try to help them improve it. I don't try to fit them into a mold. And so in my book, I'm talking about attitudes, ways of thinking. So I'll give you an example. In the Alexander technique, we have a concept called end gaining, which basically means all you're trying to do is get to the finish line. You're not paying much attention to how you get there. Okay. So what happens is, and you see that at the end of races where somebody, is smashed the 60-minute barrier for 10 kilometers, right? And you know, I'm being really facetious here because 60 minutes is a really shit time for 10 kilometers, you know? So you need some guy, some 35-year-old warrior who smashed the 60-minute barrier and is sprinting by the guy in the wheelchair over the last 40 meters. And his head is all over the place and he looks like he's being attacked by bees. And we'd call that an end gaining approach to the finish line. It's like, oh yeah, okay, you're Mr. Big and Bad. You beat that guy in the wheelchair, good for you, but you're running like shit, you know? And so when you watch people run, oftentimes they're just in an end gaining mode. They're just trying to get the run over. They're trying to run fast. They're looking at their watch and they're trying to maintain a pace. They're not listening to the fact that they're running heavy. They're not looking at the fact that their shoulders are, you know, up around their ears, that their pelvis is tight and not moving, that they're breathing way more than, they're breathing too heavy, that their heart rate might be way too high for the speed that they're actually running, so they're not running efficiently. These all go into what I call the end gaining syndrome. And we see that in all walks of life. I saw, you know, a guy the other day, the bus was coming down. It was on the other side of a main street with 5 lanes of traffic. He thought he was going to miss the bus. So he darts out in the middle of traffic to try to catch that bus. So that's end gaining, and it might have been his end, you know, if he'd have got picked off, you know, trying to make the bus, right? So he's not thinking about, well, what's the most intelligent way to sort of get downtown at this point? Is it to try to get killed, you know, by running through traffic, or maybe catch the next bus, or some other more, you know, less life-threatening way of approaching it? And in running, we see that all the time. We see people, you know, I see people who are running, who are out for an easy run, and they're way too tight. They're running too fast for their skill and fitness level. They're looking at their watch every 30 seconds. And I'm looking at them, I'm going, you're in an end gaining mode right now, mate. You know, you're working way too hard for any benefit that you might get. And as a veteran end gainer myself, I know that syndrome. I've been living it my whole life. I'm still going to meetings once a month where I stand up on a little bench and say, hi, my name's Malcolm and I'm an end gainer. And, you know, and everybody says, oh, hi, Malcolm. And, you know, so I'm dealing with that in myself. You know, it's like that joke about I've cut it twice, you know, I've cut the piece of wood twice and it's still too short. You know, that one, that's me. And that's what a lot of people do in running, you know? So when I work with them as an Alexander teacher, I try to make them aware of, okay, so look, this is how you get better. What you're doing right now isn't going to get you better. It's going to get you hurt. It's going to burn you out. It's going to plateau you.
Do you find, like, for the viewer audience here, listening audience, is that Malcolm and I actually did a workshop. We collaborated on one just before the shelter in place was issued here in Santa Cruz. I mean, literally hours, if not days before. And we had a few people in this workshop, and I got the feeling that you gave such great advice, but they're like in a karate dojo, perhaps. Everything you needed was in your white belt lessons. And you spent the next so many decades learning and eventually became this elite karate man with a black belt. But you had this epiphany that everything you needed was what you learned as a white belt. And so I got that same sense in the workshop. You were giving such great, simple, but powerful advice to this group of varying levels of ability. And I got this sense that they were thinking, oh, there's got to be more to it. Do you get that? Because
yeah.
But you gave them exactly everything, the ABCs that they needed to propel them into such happy running. And I think that everyone thinks, well, yeah, okay, I got that. But they skip over it because they think there's more to it, when in fact it's actually quite simple. Make space. Have some space. Be aware of how you move. Do you get that in your workshops?
Yeah. That they want level 2 or level 3, and I'm going, well, you know what? You just got to do this. It's not that complicated, you know. You got to do this. and you're not doing it. You think you're doing it, but you're not doing it. You know, and the reason you're not doing it is you're trying too hard, and you're trying too hard for God knows what reason. You know, and so you start to, you know, then you start to say, okay, what am I, a running shrink, or what? You know, and they start to realize, okay, wait a minute, change might mean more than just, you know, doing some you know, some glute activation exercises. Maybe I've got to look at what's driving me to always overstride, for example. Why am I overstriding all the time? Well, maybe it's because I'm, you know, over competitive, or I think that I read something in a magazine and I'm supposed to be running at this pace, and I'm forcing myself to do that. And why am I doing that? So there are lots of questions that can be asked. But generally speaking, when you get people to calm down a bit and you reassure them that even if they're calm and they're not, their heart rate is not up at a, sort of at the 95% level, and they train easy, and they start to work on their form, so they're not, you know, so asymmetrical, and they're not so held and rigid, and things are moving better, that they will get better. There's a process that you just do this, you do it regularly, you pay attention, and gradually, as you do that, the training effect comes into place, and you get better. Trying harder doesn't get you there. I remember when I was coaching university athletes, and I used to tell them, look, we're going to do 8 reps, and your level right now is to do these all at 3 minutes. So I don't want you to do the first 7 in 3 minutes and 30 seconds, and the last one in 2 minutes and 30 seconds. I want you to run them all at 3 minutes. Jesus, they had a hard time with that. It felt like, you know, either too easy or too hard. I said, that's what you can do. And if you do that, in 6 weeks' time, you'll be running way faster than you are right now. And some of them got it, and some of them, you realize that they had in their mind, okay, I run at this pace, and then I go really hard at the end, and that's what I call training. And well, why is it I don't get any better? You know, so you know, there's a famous writer out there in this world, a guy by the name of Alex Hutchison. I don't know if you've heard of Alex Hutchison. It's like, do you do cardio? First, is it cardio or weights? Do you know that book?
I do know that book.
Yes.
I do know that book.
Right. Well, I coached him back in and when he was at McGill, and I was talking with him not that long ago, and maybe he won't mind me saying this, because he said it to me. There was one time I said I wanted the team to do something that would be psychologically so overwhelming that if they could do it, they would never fear anything again in running. And there's a book out there called Once a Runner, where the coach makes the runner in this book run 60 times 400 meters
Oh.
and sets of 5. So you do 5 and you take an extra minute and do another 5. He did 60 of them. And it was absolutely devastating. So I said, okay, we're going to do the same thing in the workout today. And we were doing 1,000-meter reps. And we did the first 5, and everybody's ready to go home. I said, no, we'll just do another set of 5. Well, there was some grumbling, and the whole group did the second set of 5. And they're ready to go home. I said, no, we're going to do a third set of 5. And half the team left. They just quit on me. They went back to the dressing room, and Alex Hutchison is one of the guys who quit. We did a third set of 5, and they're ready to quit. And I said, no, we'll just do a 4th set. So we did 20 times 1,000 meters.
Oh,
okay.
They must have loved
Right?
you.
I did it with them. The guys who stayed and did that excelled over the next 3 years. Every single one of them. And the ones that I've stayed in touch with have all excelled in life. One's a doctor, one's a high-level manager with a mining company, another guy is a tech, got guys that who stuck with it, they all excelled. They had nothing. There was no fear, could not control them anymore at that point.
That's cool. That's really.
And it was like, okay, so that's what we would call a means whereby approach to facing fear. And once they did that, they had control of their minds, and they could they would decide how to train, not their fear. And I remember, and when I was speaking to Alex, this was like earlier this year, he said to me, I've always regretted that I didn't finish that workout.
Oh.
And he's a sub 4-minute miler. He's a great rider, a great runner, a great human being. But he said that to me. He said, I always regretted that I never finished that workout.
Now let's talk about your running.
Yeah.
You had some pretty neat accomplishments the beginning of this year. Tell me about it.
Well, I moved into the bottom of a new age category, which is, as you got, when you're over 40, you're a master.
You're in the 40 to 45-year-old range. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I moved into the bottom of that, the new category. I'll have to say which one it is, do I?
No. Let's let the listeners guess on that one.
All right. And so when you move into the bottom, it means you can kick the butts of the guys at the top of the range because it goes 5 years. So you want to take advantage of it. And I noticed that in Quebec, where I live in Montreal, that the age group records from 200, 400, 800, 1,500, and 3,000 meters indoors were all within range. And I said, well, wouldn't it be interesting to be able to break all those records? And 3 weeks before, and I was training for it and it was going well, and 3 weeks before that, I pulled my quad. And so I couldn't accelerate. I could jog, but I couldn't accelerate. So what did I do? I called up Rocky and I said, Rocky, I'm in deep shit here. You got to help me, mate. And so you came up with this little thing for my quad. I started doing it. I could tell within 1 day that it was getting better. So a week later, I'm back on the track. I'm training and I'm putting the pedal down, and the quad is not acting up. And I went, wow, maybe I can do this. So 3 weeks later, the provincial championships were there, and I decided not to do the 200 because that's the one which was the highest risk. And if I did that one and I blew up, I couldn't do any of the other races. So I did 400, 800, 1,500, and 3,000 over the course of 2 days. And thank goodness the quad did not blow up. And I set the Quebec records in all four events.
That's fantastic. Oh, that's huge. That's such an accomplishment. And you had been, prior to that, for about 18 months or so, been dealing with an Achilles issue, which fed up into the hamstring and a whole bunch of things, right?
Yeah. And so, I've tried different approaches, and what's helped me a lot, the Alexander always helps because it just keeps your general state of organization at a pretty good level. But I needed a bit of additional help, and that's where we met. And I started, I'd heard about AIM through Helen, and she'd worked with me a little bit, and it made a huge difference. And I realized that AIM expanded some of the ideas that we had in Alexander, but in a really practical way. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is really great stuff. It fits with Alexander so well. And I started learning about AIM, and I came to the workshop, a year ago where I met you, and worked with Helen again, and then came back again this year to do a follow-up with that. And it's changed my thinking, and it's changed my functioning. I'm much better now. I mean, with this COVID thing, there are no races going on. So I've decided to sort of start to expand my mileage. And, with this hamstring problem I had, I could go for maybe 10K, and it would, my hamstring sometimes would hurt the whole time. It's like every second step, there's pain, anyway, long story short, last Sunday I ran 27 kilometers, no problems. And tomorrow I'm slated to run 29 kilometers. And I'm very optimistic that I'll be able to do that, you know, and not have any problems.
Yeah, for those that don't know, what Malcolm's referring to, AIM, it stands for Anatomy in Motion. It is an educational course that typically is either 2 to 6 days, where you really immerse yourself into understanding anatomy as it relates to walking and running, the gait cycle. So we look at how the foot behaves through the entire gait cycle. How does that dictate the ankle's motion, the knee, the hip, the pelvis, the spine, the entire body? What is every joint doing in all three-dimensional space through every phase of the gait cycle? It's a tremendous amount of information that very few people walk away with a full comprehension of it. So they keep coming back time after time. And I've been studying it since 2014 and feel pretty good with it, but there's still so much more that can be learned from it. But that's where Malcolm and I started to discuss these things about running and walking and so on. So you were saying though.
Yeah. So that's been a tremendous addition to my Alexander background, and a compliment to it. So and it's interesting that I certainly do not consider myself an expert in anatomy and motion, but my Alexander background has given me, I think, a window to understand what they're on about, even though it's going to take me a while to integrate the concepts. I realize that, the end gaining approach for anatomy and motion is, I've got to understand all this anatomy and all these joint mechanics. And if not, I'm going to freak out. And I know with Alexander, I just sort of say, chill out, which is what we call inhibition in the Alexander technique. It's like, don't overreact to this. Learn what you can, put what you can into practice, and come back next year and learn some more. So it's been a tremendous addition to my learning about how the body moves, how the body can move better, how I can help myself, and how I can help other people. So I now include some of the AIM ideas that I've learned in the last year or so in my Art of Running workshops. So coming up next week, I'm going to be doing my third Zoom workshop, and it's on Facebook if you're interested, under the Art of Running. And some of what I'll be doing will include some of the AIM ideas, because I think they're just so right on and so helpful to runners to have a bit of understanding about this, along with the Alexander technique. You put those two together, it's a pretty good 1-2 punch, nice combination.
Yeah, tell everybody how they can sign up for this workshop, whether through Facebook or your website.
Yeah, sure. Just go on Facebook and look up the Art of Running, not Art of Running. You're going to get some pictures, but the Art of Running. And there's a the Art of Running on Zoom is there, and if you just follow the links, you can sign up. I think it's a 2-hour workshop next Saturday from 9 to 11 Eastern Standard Time. So and you can do this in the privacy and comfort of your own living room. And I don't know if you've noticed it, Rocky, but there are a hell of a lot of runners out there. We call it the COVID, running bunch. And I think that the Nike, I don't know if they've come out with the pandemic XR 19 yet, but they're bound to take advantage of the situation.
I was going to bring it up because the amount of people that I see running these days, and I'm sure you're like me, that I could sit on a park bench and just watch the different techniques and forms that go by, and just talk shop with somebody, or just geek out at all the different ways that people are moving. Some you can tell are just exquisite gazelles and waste very little energy. And then there's the other ones that, oh my gosh, it's painful to even look at this person moving. How could they even enjoy moving their body? And I actually don't think they are. I think they're just feeling like, well, it's better than sitting around. And
what I've been doing is, and I don't know why, but I've just got this thing in my head, that all the tracks are closed and everything. So what I've been doing on Saturday is just adding there's a loop that I do, which is up this little mountain called Mount Royal. And at the top, there's about a 2K loop up at the top. And what you do more mileage is you get up to the top, which is about 6K to get there. And then you do loops around the top. So I started out with 1, and tomorrow I'm going to do 8. So that's a 29-kilometer run, which is about,
Yeah, it's about 15 miles, right? 16 miles?
No, 18 miles.
18, sorry, I didn't mean to short you there. That's great.
Yeah, it's 18 bloody miles. It's a marathon training session, and I've just built up to it.
Well, that's interesting because, it was only a little while ago that you were told that you should probably just run with grandchildren and forget about it.
Oh yeah. And the tendon one tendon was 7 millimeters, and the other one was 13.5.
That was your Achilles, right?
Yeah, and you can't, if you look at them, you have to guess. You can't look at them and say, oh, it was definitely that one. You can't see it anymore.
Fantastic.
So,
and now are you actually training for a marathon now?
No, I'm getting in marathon shape. You can run 30 kilometers. Once you can run 30 kilometers a couple of times, you can run a marathon.
There you go. Wow. So, and now are you going to be indoor season obviously is well over. Even if there was an indoor season, it wouldn't be going on right now.
That's right. No, and all the outdoor events up until now are canceled, so nobody's, all the Olympians that were getting ready to compete in August, that's gone, right? So I don't know when competitions are going to open up.
Yeah. All right. So I know the last time we met, you were heading off to Japan and trying to do a workshop. Of course, that got canceled, but you travel quite a bit with these workshops. You go pretty much all over the world, but these days, the interesting thing is with Zoom, you still can do that. Isn't that remarkable? So this is a beautiful thing. If you're interested in getting to be a more efficient, easier, a happier runner, I definitely recommend taking the Art of Running workshop with Malcolm Balk. Malcolm, any like finishing words of advice to the runners out there or the wannabes?
Okay, well, I'll tell this story even though it goes against me. I've been running for over 40 years, and I'm still learning how to improve my running. So if you don't get it in the first week or the first month, you're not a bad person. You're not, it's one of these things that you're going to be refining. You're going to get some basics and you're going to refine them for as long as you're running. And I'm sure you'd say the same thing about surfing, Rocky. You've been surfing for I don't know how many years, but I'm sure you're always refining what you're doing out there. It's like that first lesson, that white belt moment, the beginner's mind, whatever you want to call it, constantly doing that. And that's what keeps it interesting at the end of the day. People say, isn't running boring? I said, anything, can be boring, and, but anything can be interesting depending what kind of a mindset you bring to that activity. So if you can bring that mindset where, oh, I wonder, if I can move a little bit easier today, or I wonder if I could learn something from somebody that would help me undo some of the blocks, or, figure this out to whatever that next stage happens to be. That'll keep it interesting for you. And hopefully, when we get through all this stuff, you'll keep running and you'll enjoy it, and it'll be a practice for a lifetime, So yeah, happy trails.
Right on. Oh, Malcolm, this was fantastic and exactly what I was hoping for. We don't have to get into specificity of arm angles or shin angle or push off. It's really just coming down to simply just get out there and feel how you're doing it. And is there a better way of doing it? And it's a constant discovery that is this path that we're on. There's no necessarily end. There's no ribbon that we're necessarily going to try and break through with our chest. It's just that continual journey of exploration. So thank you so much for being on.
What a pleasure, Rocky. It's so great to talk with you as always. It's great to see you. And I'm glad that you and everybody in the family's in good health and bearing up under the strain, as we say, you know.
Well, you too, my friend, definitely.
Yeah.
You know, one of the troubles of creating these instructional videos is that some of the movements that I'm demonstrating, I truly am not the best at demonstrating because of my own imbalances and restrictions. This particular one is probably one that goes under that category. So really rely upon the verbal instructions more so than the visual cues that you'll see my body move, because this is one that is in my program that I am continually trying to achieve better and better. It is the cats and dogs, or the quad cogs. We call it quad cogs because you're on 4 points of contact, or you're in a quadruped position where both hands and both knees are going to be supporting you in a table-like position on the floor. And the goal is to achieve nice spinal flexion where the back lifts up and come down into extension. The trouble with this one, for most people, myself included, is the area that we achieve flexion is usually in the middle of the back. And where we achieve extension is going to be in the lumbar or low back. But that is not necessarily where we want to achieve it. We actually want to slow down or diminish a little bit of the flexion in the mid-back and encourage more in the lower back, and vice versa. On the way down, we want to try and drive a little bit more into the mid-back and not cave in quite so hard into the lower back. So in this position, bear in mind, I am not a perfect example of this. You're going to have your hands so that they are directly underneath your shoulders and from all directions. So the hands do not want to be wide out, but if I took a plumb bob, a weight on the end of a string, from my shoulder joint at the end of my collarbone there, and dropped the weight down, it should go right through the middle of my hand, the middle of my wrist, and elbow for that matter. Now meanwhile, the knees themselves want to be positioned so that they are underneath the hips in all directions. As I lift up here, I'm going to try and lift through my low back as well as my mid-back. And this would be a nice time to exhale. And then, as I begin lowering down, I'm going to try and get more extension into my mid-back, feel how the shoulder blades come together without dipping deep into a saddle of my low back. And then I just change directions and come on up, trying to get that lower back to lift up at the same time the mid-back does. The head itself doesn't need to lift and lower, but it can stay nice and level, looking straight at the floor. Now sometimes what I'll do as a trainer is just encourage one area to rise up by tapping it. So if you happen to have a workout partner, you may want to just tap the area that you want to lift up and put your hand on the other area to encourage it to slow down. So we can kind of block or encourage, depending upon the person and what their spine is doing. But ultimately, what we're trying to do here is not only flex and extend the spine, but the hips and shoulders are having to go through movement that corresponds to this spinal action. So there's internal and external rotation, there's tilting, as you can see, the shoulder blades move together and apart. There's a tremendous amount of integrative movement with this action. And it's a yoga pose that's been around for somewhere between 5,000 to 10,000 years. So it's nothing new. It's just something that we need to reinforce potentially in the program based on your structure and your movement patterns. When we're doing the sagittal cogs, we're going to start by trying to pay attention to the pelvis itself. Consider it like a bowl of milk, where you have that bowl, when it's nice and level, the milk is almost at the rim and it's not going to spill out. Now, if I were to do an anterior or forward tilt, the front of the bowl right under my belly button would begin to tilt downward. The back side would begin to lift up and the milk would pour out my belly button. If I were to go in the opposite direction, from neutral or balanced position and begin tilting the back side down, the front side would lift up while my thumbs drop down and the milk would, say, pour out my tailbone. This is the action we're looking for in the sagittal cogs. Starting with the pelvis, just get a sense of what is it like to tilt the pelvis forward and tilt the pelvis back. Is there a difference between the two? And imagine that the pelvis is a bowl balanced on top of a pole, and that pole is trying to stay pretty still. So the tilt is purely forward and backward without the pole or your thighs bending and straightening. Can you just create this tilting action while your legs stay straight for the time being? Now, as you tilt this back and forth, can you get a sense of action feeding up into your rib cage? When you tilt the pelvis forward, your ribs would be sent forward through the spine unless you did something else to maintain a balance point. And that is to tilt the ribs in the opposite direction, backwards. So can we get a sense of what that's like with a forward tilt and a backward tilt? Anterior, posterior. Does your head stay in one place above the rib cage? And does your rib cage stay above the pelvis? You can see in the background that the board right in front of my body is not being broken. I'm not letting my head or my ribs or pelvis drive in front of that line. So it might be something good to use a mirror perhaps in the future to see if these movements are for you. Now, there is a bony part of your pelvis called the pubic bone, and then there's the xiphoid process. If you've ever taken a CPR class, you probably know what that is. It's the very tip at the bottom of your sternum or manubrium right there in the front of your rib cage here. You're going to try and bring these 2 points together, or at least closer. They don't have to touch. And then you're going to cause them to move away from each other. Can you do this action still maintaining a stacked position with your posture? What is that like? Are you able to flex into the spine and extend? Do you notice that only the pelvis is moving and the ribs are not doing much? Or are the ribs doing everything and the pelvis is not moving? Can you get them to move simultaneously in a cooperative way? Now, the head itself wants to maintain a nice level posture while everything else is moving underneath it. Kind of like a duck on water. The feet are moving fast and furious below the surface, but you wouldn't know it from looking up above. The head is always trying to stay locked on the horizon. So as we move through these cog actions, we'll explore what it's really doing to the head. So if I'm flexing my spine and I were to just freeze this position and straighten out the body, you'd see my head is actually tilted back. In the same direction my pelvis is tilting. And when the pelvis tilts forward, the ribs tilt back and the head stays level. If I were to straighten this out, we would see my head tilting forward as well. It is tilting forward and tilting back with these motions, but the body moving underneath it causes the head to stay level. Now, what does it mean for the legs? Well, as I do my anterior tilt, I want to have my knees begin to bend. Some rib cage tilting up and back, pelvis tilting forward, and knees going into a flex position, which causes my ankles to go into a flex position. And the knees travel slightly inward to flatten out those arches of my feet. And the opposite occurs when I go into a posterior tilt. The knees begin to extend, the arches begin to lift. You may feel weight more toward the outside of the feet and into the heels. Can you get a sensation of that? What is that like? Do you struggle with one motion? Can you work through it? This is just another way of integrating proper joint mechanics and biomechanics into your body, something that may be missing a little bit here and there. So do be sure to assess, then move, then reassess, just like all the others, to make sure, is this what you need at this time? There shouldn't be necessarily any pain with this. Pain is your body's way of telling you, I'm not probably doing this the right way. Maybe slow it down, check out how it is you're moving. Maybe cleaning up the movement will actually let that pain sensation drift off. But if it does continue, maybe this just isn't the one for you at this time. Before you go, our new book, Return to Center, breaks down everything we did today and a whole lot more. So check it out at rockysnyder.com. Our link is on our page too. If you still haven't subscribed to this channel, please do. Thanks for watching.